Okay. First verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Shabiznis, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information, dated this date, July 26, 2023, signed by the foreperson. Second verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Shabiznis, guilty of mutilating a corpse as charged in count 2 of the information, dated this date, July 26, 2023, signed by the foreperson. The next verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Shabiznis, guilty of third-degree sexual assault as charged in count 3 of the information, dated this date, 26th day of July, 2023, signed by the foreperson. The verdicts appear to be in order.
Pedro Pablo Nakatoidna was abused by his family from a young age. His sisters would have him dress up as a woman. His father was an alcoholic who would abuse his mother. Lidna killed his victims with several 9mm pistols that were equipped with rubber silencers that he had made from slippers. He claimed of wishing to cleanse the earth by eliminating drug addicts and prostitutes, homosexuals, and criminals, after being commanded by God to do so. Lidna was arrested on December 28, 2006, when police went to his workplace and he ran out of bullets after firing at them and retreating. One officer was wounded. He was convicted of 17 murders and confessed to killing 25. He was sentenced to the maximum of 35 years in prison. Margaret A. Allen was sentenced to death on May 19, 2011 for torturing and killing her housekeeper, Wenda Wright, whom she thought had stolen money from her purse. A medical examiner described the nearly dozen blows to Wright's face and body and the belt tightened so severely around her neck she lost consciousness. The defense tried to spare Allen from the death penalty. They brought a neurologist in to testify, claiming she suffers from brain damage due to previous assaults and because of her condition could not plan a murder scheme. The jury unanimously voted for the death penalty for her. She also got a life sentence for kidnapping. Prosecutors said the torture went on for hours before Wright was strangled with a belt. Allen's roommate, James Martin, and nephew, Quinton Allen, were both convicted for their part in helping her try to bury the body in a shallow grave. Robert Latimer is a Canadian murderer. He murdered his daughter, Tracy. The murder occurred on October 24, 1993. He did this by placing her in his truck and connecting a hose from the truck's exhaust pipe to the cab. Latimer says that he killed his daughter because she had severe mental and physical disabilities, and ongoing health problems as a result of cerebral palsy, and he believed that the next surgery she was to have, to remove a permanently disconnected hip, would only add to her suffering. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 10 years on November 1994. He was released in December 2010. Disability rights advocates said that killing a severely disabled child like Tracy should carry the same penalty as killing a non-disabled child. To do otherwise would devalue the lives of disabled people. In 1989, Daniel Radkowitz cannibalized his girlfriend, Monica Beryl, after accidentally killing her during a sadistic beating in her apartment in New York's Lower East Side. Over the next several weeks, he dissected and boiled her remains in the kitchen of their apartment at 700 East 9th Street. "I killed her and boiled her head," he told a friend, "then I made soup out of her brains. It tasted pretty good." A small-time drug dealer and devil worshipper, Radkowitz enjoyed his cannibalistic transgression so much, that he scrawled on the door of his apartment, "Is it soup yet? Welcome to Charlie Gaines Ranch East, home of the fine young cannibals." He was found not guilty by reason of insanity on February 22, 1991 and shipped off to a state hospital for the criminally insane. On November 17, 1972, Anthony Beckiel stabbed his mother to death. When police arrived, they found him ordering a Chinese meal. At his Old Bailey trial, which began on June 6, 1973, witnesses told of the possibility of an incestuous relationship between Anthony and his mother. It was suggested that his mother had been trying to cure her son of his homosexuality. His defense, one of diminished responsibility, was successfully argued and he was found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. He was sent to Broadmoor. He was discharged in July 1980 and went to live with his grandmother in New York. He had only been there a week before he attacked the elderly woman. Because she nagged him, he was locked up on Rikers Island and committed suicide there on March 21, 1981. Yakov Guzman was murdered on April 6, 1996, by his wife Rita Guzman, in his home in Rockland County, New York. He was stabbed and struck with an axe and a hammer, and his body was chopped into more than 65 pieces, with a hacksaw and scalpel. Guzman was sentenced to life in prison, after being convicted on a federal charge of interstate domestic violence resulting in death. On July 28, 2020, Guzman was granted a compassionate release after she experienced several medical issues including multiple strokes. She was released from the Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, and headed to Hackensack, New Jersey, where she planned to reside with her sister. Guzman also has to wear a GPS monitoring device. Christopher Dankovich, 16, apologized for what he did and said that he was not a violent person. The youth was a 15-year-old Rochester Adams High School student when he stabbed his mother, 50-year-old Diane Michelle, 111 times with a small knife on the night of April 24, 2005, inside their home near Tiankin and Adams Roads, Rochester Hills, Michigan, USA. Her body was found the next morning, after Dankovich had fled to his father's northern Michigan cottage, where he was arrested. After several attempts to negotiate a sentencing agreement, a deal was finally reached. The teenager's thoughts and beliefs are that he was on a mission from God, but he has recognized the inappropriateness of his behavior. He was sentenced to 25 to 37 years in prison on May 1, 2006. Victoria, Australia. On September 4, 2005, Robert Farquharson was returning his children to their mother after a Father's Day access visit. His white 1989 VN Commodore veered across the Princes Highway between Winchelsea and Geelong, crashed through a fence and came to rest in a farm dam where it filled with water and submerged. His three children, Jay, 10, Tyler, 7, and Bailey, 2, were unable to free themselves and drowned. Farquharson managed to escape and alerted another driver who took him to nearby Winchelsea. Police divers recovered the boys' bodies about 2 a.m. the next day. They were still inside the vehicle. He had earlier told a friend that he had intended to kill his children to get back at his wife. On October 15, 2010 he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a 33-year minimum. On August 5, 2012, Wade Michael Page fatally shot 6 people and wounded 4 others in a mass shooting at a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Page committed suicide by shooting himself in the head after he was shot in the stomach by a responding police officer. Page was an American white supremacist and United States Army veteran from Cudahy, Wisconsin. All of the dead were members of the Sikh faith. The incident drew notable reactions from President Barack Obama and Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Dignitaries attended candlelight vigils in countries such as the US, Canada, and India. The First Lady Michelle Obama visited the temple on August 23, 2012. Page killed 5 men and 1 woman, ranging in age from 39 to 84. The Marquis Elkins, 18, was sentenced in Georgia's Glynn County Superior Court, less than 2 weeks after a jury found him guilty of murder in the slaying of 13-month-old Antonio Santiago. The toddler was in his stroller and out for a walk with his mother, when he was shot between the eyes March 21st, in the Georgia coastal city of Brunswick. The mother and a younger teenager charged with being an accomplice, testified at the trial that Elkins killed the boy after his mother refused to give up her purse. Elkins was spared the death penalty because the killing occurred when he was 17, which the United States Supreme Court has ruled is too young to face capital punishment. Under Georgia law, the only possible punishments for Elkins were life with or without a chance of parole. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole on September 12, 2013. Juha Valyakala was released from a prison in Turku on May 1, 1988, after which he started wandering through Sweden and Finland with his 21-year-old girlfriend, Rita Guzman. On July 3 they arrived in Amsel. One night, Valyakala stole a bicycle. He was pursued by Sten Nilsson and his 15-year-old son Frederick. The chase ended at a cemetery where Sten and Frederick Nilsson were shot. Later that night, Sten's wife, and Frederick's mother, Eva Nilsson, went looking for the two, and was stabbed to death outside the cemetery. Valyakala and Rita Guzman were caught in Odense, Denmark, just over a week later. Valyakala was given a life sentence on 3 counts of murder, while Rita Guzman got off with 2 years for complicity in assault and battery. A Pennsylvania man rear-ended his ex-girlfriend's car and then shot her and himself in a murder-suicide, authorities say. Amanda Boring, 37, was driving down the road in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, shortly after 10 p.m. on Friday when her ex-boyfriend, William C. Yarina, rear-ended her vehicle. Boring and Yarina got out of their vehicles. A verbal altercation ensued. Yarina then pulled out a gun and shot Boring and himself. Multiple people called 911 about the altercation, including Boring's 12-year-old son who had been in the vehicle and witnessed the incident. The boy was not harmed in the crash or the shooting. Both Boring and Yarina, 38, were pronounced dead at the scene. They had each suffered a single gunshot wound to the chest. Gertrude Bastowski, also known as Gertrude Wright, and the Torture Mother, was an Indiana divorcee, who oversaw and facilitated the prolonged torture, mutilation, and eventual murder of Sylvia Likens, a teenage girl she had taken into her home. The case is unique in that, while Bastowski did play an active role in Likens' death, the majority of the torture that eventually brought about Likens' demise was carried out by Bastowski's teenage children and other neighborhood children. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, on May 24, 1966. Resentenced to 18 years to life. Released on December 4, 1985. Died on June 16, 1990. For 5 years, Violani Maphosa terrorized the rural villagers of Tholani in the Eastern Cape, preying on vulnerable women and children, who he assaulted, and in some cases, hacked to death. His modus operandi involved stalking his targets, who were mostly vulnerable. It mattered not how young the victim was. No one was spared, Judge Conjwe said. The High Court Judge Naluthando Conjwe sentenced him to 25 life sentences for 25 crimes, committed between 2007 and 2012. Each of the sentences are to run concurrently, amounting to 625 years. As the judge handed down her sentence, Maphosa remained silent and avoided eye contact with the families and relatives of his victims sitting in the public gallery. On December 9, 1981, Daniel Faulkner, a 25-year-old Philadelphia police officer, observed a light blue Volkswagen driving the wrong way down a one-way street. Officer Faulkner then pulled the Volkswagen over. He exited his vehicle and approached the driver's side of the Volkswagen, which was being driven by William Cook. Sitting in a taxi cab across the street was William Cook's older brother, Mumia Abu Jamal. While Officer Faulkner was distracted by Cook, Jamal fired one shot that hit Officer Faulkner's back. Jamal then put the muzzle of his gun within inches of Officer Faulkner's face, and squeezed off the final and fatal shot. The bullet entered the officer's face slightly above the eye and came to rest in his brain, killing him instantly. Mumia Abu Jamal was sentenced to life in December 2001. An Idaho mother has been sentenced to life in prison for killing her two youngest children and a romantic rival, in a bizarre case where she claimed her son and daughter were zombies, and she was a goddess sent to usher in the biblical apocalypse. Lori Valadebell was sentenced to 3 life sentences without parole for killing 7-year-old Joshua Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, as well as conspiring to kill her 5th husband's previous wife. Valadebell justified the murders by going down a bizarre religious rabbit hole. Tylee appeared to have been stabbed and her body burned before it was buried. Joshua's head was wrapped in tape and plastic, asphyxiating him. Daybell believed people in her life had been taken over by evil spirits and turned into zombies, including Joshua and Tylee. Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case, she said. Matthew Quesada, 26, was convicted at the Old Bailey of murdering Alan Smith in a frenzied and wordless attack. Mr. Smith, 63, was stabbed 5 times in front of his family in the East London cafe as revenge for asking if Quesada's crying 3-year-old girl was alright. Quesada replied, "What's it got to effing do with you? Go away." As Mr. Smith was eager to avoid confrontation, he went with his family from the BB Cafe in Layton to the nearby Roma Cafe. Meanwhile, Quesada took his daughter home to his partner Maria Bridget, and came back with a knife that he used to stab Mr. Smith, without saying a word to him. Paramedics carried out an open-heart surgery in the cafe but failed to save Mr. Smith, who died in hospital. Leslie Galloway was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in Harrison County in 2010. Prosecutors say Galloway, now 29, killed 17-year-old Shakelia Anderson of Gulfport, and dumped her body in a rural wooded area off Mississippi Highway 15. Anderson was last seen getting into Galloway's car on December 5, 2008. Hunters found her body the next day. The teenager had been assaulted and severely burned, and had been run over by a vehicle. The Mississippi Supreme Court upheld the sentence in a ruling. A witness testified she saw Shakelia get into a car Leslie Galloway was driving the night of her murder. Galloway also admitted to police that he had picked her up. Traces of Shakelia's remains were found under the car. In Satat, Morocco, between January 2, 2007, and January 3, 2008, serial killer, Hitam Rewi, assaults and kills 3 women, living in the same neighborhood. The police in the capital of Chewia caught the killer during the same year. The first corpse was discovered on Saturday, February 11, 2007, near the Slaughterhouse District. It is a young girl, aged 20, living in the Enada district. A few days later, the body of another young girl, aged 22, was discovered on the National Road. A year later, on Tuesday, March 11, 2008, a third body was discovered in a tree-covered pit behind the industrial district, not far from Oued Abu Moussa. Hitam Rewi was sentenced to death. A Farmington woman was sentenced to 14 years in prison for a fatal DUI crash that left 2 people dead. Stephanie Melgoza, 24, pleaded guilty to 2 counts each of aggravated driving under the influence of alcohol and aggravated reckless driving. The vehicle Melgoza was driving struck and killed 55-year-old Paul Prowant of Avon Lake, Ohio, and Andrea Rosewiz, 43, of Seattle, Washington, on an East Peoria access road off North Main Street on the 10th of April, 2022. Police reports detail partial limb amputations and full blunt force trauma to both victims. An open bottle of Tito's vodka and cannabis were found in her vehicle. Upon finding out she was responsible for the deaths, she sang, laughed, and made jokes. On Saturday, August 24, 1867, 7-year-old Fanny and her young sister left their home to play with their friend. The 3 children walked the half-mile to Flood Meadow. When they arrived, they were met by Frederick Baker. He offered them halfpennies. They went along with the young man quite willingly. Baker gave the 2 other girls another halfpenny each and told them to go home. He picked up young Fanny and carried her into the hop field. When she failed to return home, a search party set out and soon found her. She had been battered to death. Her head with its eyes gouged out had been stuck on a pole, and other portions of the child were found nearby. It did not take the authorities long to arrest Baker. They examined his diary and found the entry, Saturday, August 24th, killed a young girl. It was fun and hot. The jury found Baker guilty and he was hanged. David Ivey was sentenced to death by the state of Tennessee for the murder of his ex-girlfriend. Ivey had been threatening to harm her because she wanted to end the relationship. On the morning of June 6, 2001, a Memphis police officer responded to an assault call at an apartment complex. Upon arriving at the apartment complex, the complainant, Lakeisha Thomas, reported that she had been assaulted. According to court documents, David Ivey had previously assaulted the victim, and she had obtained a protection order against him. However, before police could arrest him, he would murder the woman. She was gunned down in a parking lot. The order of protection she had just gotten did nothing to shield her from his bullets. David Ivey was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death. On May 27, 1997, the head of June Hayes, a student at Tanahata Elementary School, was found in front of the school gate hours before students arrived for classes. Hayes had apparently been beheaded with a knife, with further mutilations being done. A note written in red pen was found stuffed in his mouth, identifying the killer as Sakakibara. On June 6, a letter was sent to the newspaper Kobe Shimbun, in which Sakakibara claimed responsibility for the slaying and decapitation of June Hayes, and threatened that more killings would follow. 14-year-old Shinichiro Azuma was arrested on June 28, 1997 and sent to the Special Medical Reformatory for Juvenile Offenders in Fuku, Western Tokyo, in October 1997 and released on March 11, 2004. Petr Zelenka is a Czech serial killer who was found guilty of administering a blood-thinning drug called heparin to 17, mostly elderly patients, earning him the nickname, the Heparin Killer. He had no authority to administer medicine at all without a doctor's supervision. He gave the lethal injections between May and September 2006, causing massive internal bleeding. His lawyers had pleaded a lesser sentence on grounds of diminished responsibility, claiming he was mentally ill, but that was rejected by the court. He was sentenced to life in prison on February 22, 2008, for 7 murders and 10 attempted murders. He would have gotten the death penalty had it not been abolished in 1990. The conviction makes him the worst serial killer in the country's post-communist history. Ship's steward, James Cam, murdered Eileen Gibson on board the Union Castle liner, Durban Castle, which was sailing from Cape Town to Southampton. Being on the ship, it was easy to dispose of the body. The murder took place in Gibson's cabin. Cam then pushed the body through the cabin's porthole. The body was never recovered. It was thought at first that Gibson had just fallen overboard and drowned. Cam was sentenced to death on March 23, 1948. The sentence was commuted to life in prison. He was released in September 1959 and sentenced to 2 years probation for indecently assaulting a young girl, sending him back to prison to complete his life sentence. He was released from prison in 1978 and died on July 7, 1979. Erin Allegra, the 32-year-old Port St. Lucie woman accused of smothering her 8-year-old son to death on Christmas Day 2008, avoided the possibility of a death sentence by pleading guilty Wednesday afternoon to premeditated first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse charges. After smothering her son, Allegra got in the room's bathtub and tried to kill herself by slitting her wrists. When the suicide attempt was unsuccessful, she called 911. In an interview soon after her arrest, Allegra was asked by police if she considered herself crazy or insane. "No, I knew what I was doing and I did it." Allegra told police she killed Tristan rather than leave him with his father. The couple had been separated. She was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder charge, plus 30 years to run consecutively for the child abuse charge. Randy Haight escaped from the Johnson County Jail in 1985. He was there while awaiting trials in 3 counties. He stole guns and several cars. He shot at a Kentucky State Police trooper and caused another police officer's death in a gunfight. He executed a young couple while they were inside their car. He shot the man in the face, chest, shoulder, and in the back of the head, and shot the woman in the shoulder, temple, back of the head, and through the eye. He spent all but 2 of his 15 adult years in 4 Ohio, 3 Virginia, and 4 Kentucky prisons. Randy Haight was sentenced to death on March 22, 1994, in Jefferson County, for the murder of Patricia Vance and David Omer, on August 22, 1985. Officers carrying out an eviction in Detroit's East Side found the children's frozen bodies covered in plastic, on March 24, 2015 in a deep freezer. Blair was charged with 2 counts each of felony murder, premeditated murder, and torture, in the deaths of Stoney and Blair and Stephen Gage Berry. Investigators believe Stephen was 9 when he died in August 2012, and that Stoney was 13 when she died the following May. Blair admitted to the horrific crimes, saying she attacked the children months apart. In 2012 and 2013, she said she intended to kill Stoney, but didn't know that the abuse of her son would be fatal. Mitchell Blair was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders in June 2015 and was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. In the court, she even said that she'd do it again if she had to. Charles Jackson Jr., known as the East Bay Slayer, was an American serial killer, who murdered at least 7 women and 1 man, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Between 1975 and 1982, Jackson confessed quickly, and was tried for the string of homicides. Evidently, after killing his victims, Jackson enjoyed assaulting their corpses, and sitting down to a meal, before taking advantage of the situation, and stealing some valuables. He was sentenced to 18 consecutive life terms, convicted of a single murder. He died in prison in 2002, before the more complete exposure of his crimes was revealed. His death didn't slow the investigators down. In 2005, based on results from the DNA research, Jackson's involvement was revealed in several more murders. February 5, 1983, Gary Lambrix and his roommate Francis Smith met Clarence Moore and Alicia Bryant and then took them back to their trailer. He killed Moore by hitting him in the head with a tire iron, and killed Bryant by strangulation. Smith then helped Lambrix clean up, bury the bodies and throw the bloody shirt and tire iron into a nearby stream. On February 8, 1983, Smith was arrested. On February 10, 1983, he informed the police about the two buried bodies. The police investigation led to the discovery of the bodies, Lambrix's bloody shirt and the tire iron. The medical examination of the bodies confirmed Lambrix's statements regarding the incident. Lambrix was sentenced to death and died by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Bradford County, 2017. The Bombo shooting was a mass murder that occurred in Bombo, when UPDF Private Patrick Okot Odoch killed 10 people and wounded at least 2 others in a bar with an AK-47. During the night of March 8, Odoch was on duty at the 23rd Air Defense Regiment. He left his post armed with an AK-47 assault rifle and 30 rounds of ammunition and arrived at Young Bay Boys Bar in Beckiel on March 9 at 12:12 a.m. Upon entering, he opened fire on the people present, killing one Masodul, his wife Florence, the owner of the bar Amina Siru, as well as 4 other soldiers and 2 civilians, while 2 persons were wounded. He was arrested in Oyam district 10 days later and charged with murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 90 years in prison on June 4, 2013. Matthew Quintiliano was a 14-year veteran of the Stratford, Connecticut Police Department. Quintiliano snapped one afternoon in May 1975, accosting his wife outside the Bridgeport Hospital where she worked, shooting her 8 times with a pistol. Arrested for murder, Quintiliano spent 3 years in custody, before a panel of judges found him innocent by reason of insanity. After 3 months of treatment, staff psychiatrists ordered his release. Remarried by 1983, Matthew was served with divorce papers on February 11th. He murdered his wife the next day, and was arrested on February 16th, faced with another count of first-degree murder. He was confined to prison when psychiatrists agreed, this time, that he was sane. Russell Elwood was suspected of killing as many as 15 women and was sentenced to life in prison for the only murder authorities could pin on him. He was convicted of murdering Cheryl Lewis, who was one of 26 women, most of them prostitutes, found dead in swampy areas around New Orleans from 1991 through 1996. At the time of Elwood's arrest in 1997, authorities said they suspected him in as many as 15 killings, and Jefferson Parish Sheriff Harry Lee claimed authorities were searching for at least 4 other suspects, but no other arrests or charges were ever made. A second murder charge against Elwood was dismissed when prosecutors learned he had an alibi. Most of the 26 victims were women with histories of drug abuse. Elwood died at Angola State Prison in Angola, Louisiana in 2014. April 30th, 2000. 4 a.m. in the town of Waitara. A cop and a criminal stood locked, in what was to become one of New Zealand's most controversial face-offs. Broken glass and battered cars lay around them. All the product of a golf club attack, wheedled by Stephen Wallace. As Senior Constable Keith Abbott drew his gun, Wallace advanced towards him, armed with a baseball bat and a golf club. When after a warning was given, a retreat had been made, and a warning shot fired, it failed to stop the advancing Wallace. Abbott fired 4 shots. Wallace fell to the ground. Stephen Wallace later died in hospital. Senior Constable Keith Abbott was acquitted on self-defense on December 4, 2002. The Lover's Lane murderer was an American serial killer who was active every 28 days for 3 months in 1977. From January to March of 1977, the Lover's Lane murderer sought out couples and then shot them. On January 16, 1977, he shot a couple in their car at Adams Park. On February 12, 1977, he shot a couple in their locked car through the window at West Manor Park. The couple survived, but suffered multiple chest wounds. On March 12, 1977, he shot at couple at Adams Park. The female victim died from her wounds. The male survived. In April of 1977, police were aware of the pattern and staked out multiple locations. The murders ended, and is now a cold case. The Frankfurt Slasher is the name given by the media to a possible serial killer who operated in and around the neighborhood of Frankfurt in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. From 1985 to 1990, Leonard Christopher was convicted in the murder of one of the 9 supposedly linked victims. All of the victims were assaulted and stabbed to death. Several of the victims were seen with a middle-aged white man shortly before their murders. A 9th victim was stabbed to death in the same fashion as the other women while Christopher was being held without bail. However, this murder was ruled a copycat killing by detectives. Leonard Christopher was tried and convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder on December 12, 1990, and sentenced to life in prison. He has since died of cancer, maintaining his innocence since the beginning. Martin Navas is an Indian psychopathic serial killer who operated in the city of Kollam, Kerala between June and August 2012. Pavement dwellers were bludgeoned to death while they slept. All the murders took place at night and were committed by using stones or hard blunt objects. Navas had already been convicted twice for murder. He was acquitted because there were no witnesses. A drug addict, Navas used to sleep by 8 p.m. and wake up at midnight to roam the city, targeting victims. He committed 7 murders, and had attempted 2 more murders, but the victims escaped with injuries. The lack of any obvious motive seems to indicate that his victims were merely objects on which to vent a homicidal rage. He was captured on charges of murdering one Shamir at Karakode in the city, following which he was arrested and convicted. Larry M. Ralston is an American serial killer who murdered by strangulation at least 4 hitchhikers in Ohio between 1975 and 1977. Linda K. Harmon, 17, Nancy L. Grigsby, 23, Elena Marie Baer, 15, Diana Sue McCroby, 16, Mary Ruth Hopkins, 21. Originally sentenced to die in the electric chair, Ralston's sentence was later commuted to 4 life sentences. 1 conviction was overturned, but in 1984, he received another life sentence for murder. He remains imprisoned. Despite multiple parole applications, Ralston is still alive, currently imprisoned at Madison Correctional Institution. He is now 74 years old. Samuel Sidono is a South African serial killer. His victims all came from the Pretoria area of Gauteng. Sidono undertook a murderous rampage starting November 1998 and culminating with his arrest on January 6, 1999. He killed and disposed of his victims in the Capital Park Hills of Pretoria, a deserted area of hills near the city center and Pretoria Zoo. On August 30, 2000, Sidono was convicted of the 7 murders. He was sentenced on September 5, 2000, to 7 life terms, with the recommended 40 years in jail before he could be paroled. The judge said an expert on serial killers had described Sidono as a psychopathic, sadistic sexual murderer, adding that Sidono could therefore not be rehabilitated. Sergei Dovzhenko is a Ukrainian Soviet serial killer. and former operative of the Mariupol police known as Murchik. He confessed to committing 19 murders between November 1998 and May 2002. Speaking at trial, Dobchenko revealed the motives of his crimes. Almost all murders were committed with one goal: to punish those who mock me. I wanted to punish the elders. On September 8, 2003, the Court of Appeal of the Donetsk region decided to recognize the defendant as guilty of committing 17 murders. According to the conclusion of the forensic psychological investigation, Dobchenko was secretive, ambitious, vindictive, possesses the features of a leader, the motive of his crimes greed and revenge, transformed by internal unconscious marginal and necrophilic tendencies of personality. Saeed Hani I was born in 1962. His mother violently abused him. He later claimed that she frequently scratched him with her fingernails hard enough to draw blood, and attempted to bite off pieces of his flesh. At the time of his murders, he was married and had 3 children. He was a construction worker by profession. The murders were referred to as the spider killings because Hani I lured the women to his home and strangled them and dumped their bodies. He had killed 16 women between August 2000 and July 2001, when he was apprehended by the police. He claimed in court that he began killing prostitutes after his wife was mistaken for one and that God approved of his work. Hani I was found guilty and hanged at dawn on April 8, 2002, in Mashhad prison. The Freeway Phantom strangled 6 young women and girls in Washington, D.C. in the early 1970s, dumping their bodies by freeways. One of the bodies contained a note from the killer, reading, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Freeway Phantom." Based on handwriting samples, authorities surmised that the note, written on paper cut from the victim's notebook. The Freeway Phantom case has seen a myriad of investigators and garnered much interest. Numerous investigative tips came from the general public by a telephone hotline operated by the Metropolitan Police Department of the District of Columbia. The case has been closed and opened a number of times and is currently open as a cold case. A reward of $150,000 remains open. Vadim Nikolaevich Arshev, also known as the Maniac with a Diary, is a Russian serial killer. Between 1992 and 1995, he committed more than 70 crimes in Krasnoyarsk and its environs, including 19 murders and 8 attempted murders. He is considered one of the most terrible serial killers in the history of the Krasnoyarsk Krai. While confessing to law enforcement, he pointed to his residence where irrefutable evidence was found: the tools of the crime, 2 knives, as well as the belongings of the victims. He suffered from a total delay in psychosexual development, with an anomaly of the sexual attraction of the sadistic circle, in the form of a desire to kill. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and is currently serving his sentence in the Black Dolphin prison, in Solilitsk, Orenburg Oblast. Florencio Fernandez was an Argentine serial killer, who murdered around 15 women in his hometown of Monteros, by biting out their jugular veins. He would finally leave the victims to bleed to death, if they hadn't died already. He stalked his victims for several days, made sure they were alone at home, and taking advantage of the hot spring or summer nights, when residents left their windows open during the night, he entered the house through them. Florencio claimed that drinking blood gave him orgasms. His actual existence, however, is disputed as an urban legend by a number of Argentine sources. Florencio was arrested on February 14, 1960, declared insane, and confined in a psychiatric institution, where he died of natural causes a few years later. Gordon Northgate was an American serial killer, who abducted and murdered boys aged between 10 and 12 in Los Angeles between 1926 and 1928. He then disposed of the bodies with the help of his mother and his underage nephew, whom Northgate had repeatedly threatened and abused. Police considered Northgate a suspect in the disappearance of as many as 20 missing boys in the area that Northgate admitted to having abused, but not murdered. One of these boys surfaced years later, alive, and confirmed Northgate's story. According to his nephew, only 4 boys were held and murdered at Northgate's property: the 3 LA children whose remains were found, and an unidentified boy that Northgate beheaded and disposed of near La Puente, California. He confessed to the murders of 9 in total, sentenced to death. He was executed on October 2, 1930. Frank Gust is a German serial killer. He has been dubbed the Rhine-Ruhr Ripper because his actions, mainly committed in the Rhine-Ruhr region in western Germany, share similarities with London's Jack the Ripper murders. Gust is classified as a sexual sadist. At a very young age, he showed a tendency to abuse animals, experiencing sexual arousal when torturing, killing, and gutting animals. At age 13 he began breaking into morgues to act on his necrophiliac inclinations. After he was arrested, Gust stated that his greatest desire was to touch the beating heart of a dying woman. On September 21, 2000, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for killing 4 women. Gust started therapy, which he quit after only 6 months, proclaiming that he wasn't treatable and would always remain a threat to other people. Sibisaso Derek Duma is a South African serial killer who was convicted of 2 murders in 2007 and 5 murders in 2009, and sentenced to 8 life sentences in prison. He was mostly active around the city of Pietermaritzburg, KwaZulu-Natal. Duma is a violent psychopath who partook of theft, kidnapping, torture, rape and murder. He worked as a taxi driver and used his vehicle as a weapon on occasion, as well as to obtain his victims. Duma's reasoning, victimology, and methodology changed sometimes from victim to victim, indicating that he was a disorganized killer. He laughed when sentenced, saying, "They're dead now. What are they worrying about?" Acting Judge Kovas Boyen said he intends that Duma should be permanently removed from society. Rudolf Pleil was a German serial killer, known as the Dead Maker. He was convicted of killing a salesman and 9 women, but claimed to have killed 25 people. Many of his crimes took place in the Harz mountain range. Pleil became a cook in a labor camp, where he killed and ate cats. He admitted to having committed murders as early as 1945, but this could not be proven. On April 18, 1947, Pleil was arrested after the robbery of a Hamburg businessman, whose body, dismembered by axe blows, was found in the Creek Zorchbach. Pleil worked in a Cella prison as an executioner. He boasted that he had prior experience with killing. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for multiple murders. On February 16, 1958, Pleil hanged himself in his cell. Celine Massage is a French woman and serial baby killer, found guilty in 2010 of murdering 6 of her newborn babies between 2000 and 2007 after giving birth to them in secret. She suffocated 4 of them and strangled 2. On October 19, 2007, a new boyfriend, Luke Margaret, found the 6 corpses in the basement of the apartment he and Massage were sharing. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the murders by a court in northern France. Though she admitted to the murders, she told a court in the Normandy town of Coutances, "Yes, I am guilty. I am aware that I killed my babies, but it's too hard. I horrify myself so much that I am hiding from myself."